Imagine a time when the world was still balanced between deep faith and the fear of the unknown. The 17th century was an era of contrasts. While kings and popes fought over power and territories, in the small towns of Europe, the Catholic faith was the only certainty in the face of life's uncertainties. Plague, wars, and famine ravaged the people, yet the church remained a refuge, a fortress against the chaos. It was in this setting, in an Italy still fragmented into duchies and kingdoms, where the Pope ruled over the Papal States as both a spiritual and political authority, that a girl was born, one destined to bear on her own body the marks of Christ's passion. Her name was Ursula Giuliani, but later, upon dedicating herself as a nun, she would become Saint Veronica Giuliani, one of the most mysterious and fascinating women in the history of the Church. Now, close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine a small, simple convent cell, lit only by the flickering glow of a candle. On the cold stone floor, a woman kneels. Her thin, frail body trembles in the grip of a painful ecstasy. Suddenly, something invisible seems to pierce her chest. She arches her back, clutches her heart, gasping for breath. Her eyes fill with tears, and then a voice. "My daughter, the cross awaits you." What Veronica felt was not merely a spiritual rapture. Her heart burned as if it were being branded by fire, and in a way, it was. In the future, when doctors examine her body after her death, they will find something that defies any scientific explanation. Religious symbols engraved on her heart, as if they had been carved by invisible hands. But before this mystery is revealed, we must go back in time and understand how a simple girl from a small Italian town became a living testimony to Christ's suffering and love. Ursula Giuliani was born on December 27, 1660, in the small town of Mercatello sul Metauro, a quiet place surrounded by rolling hills and the crisp winter winds of Italy. Her father, Francesco Giuliani, was a strict but devout man. Her mother, Benedetta Mancini, was a pious woman who saw faith as the foundation of everything. From a very young age, Ursula showed that she was different. You know, those children who seem to be born with a wisdom beyond their years? She was one of them. While other girls ran through the fields playing with dolls, Ursula withdrew in prayer. At just 4 years old, something remarkable happened. Her mother was on the brink of death, and a priest came to bring her the Eucharist. That's when little, fragile Ursula asked to receive communion as well. Everyone chuckled, amused by the innocence of the child, and tried to distract her by saying there was only one host. But her response left them speechless, then break off a piece. Just like a broken mirror still reflects the whole image, each part of the host contains Jesus in his entirety. The priest was at a loss for words. How could a child have such a profound understanding of faith? Her mother's death was a heavy blow. Unable to care for his daughters alone, her father decided to send Ursula and her sisters to live with an uncle. But during this time, something began to stir within her. She felt she didn't belong to this world, that God was calling her to something greater. And that's when she faced the first great challenge of her life. Her father did not want her to become a nun. Francesco Giuliani dreamed of a good marriage for his daughter. He wanted to see her well settled, with a husband, children, and a comfortable life. But Ursula had other plans. "I want to belong to God," she said, determined. Her father tried everything. First, he asked Ursula's older sister, who was already a nun, to persuade her to change her mind. But the young girl's response was sharp and unwavering. "If you insist on this, you will never see me again. And you, as a religious woman, should be ashamed of trying to turn me away from God's will." When Francesco realized that his daughter would not waver, he finally gave his consent. And so, at the age of 17, Ursula entered the convent of the Capuchin Poor Clares in Città di Castello. Upon taking the religious habit, she adopted the name Veronica in honor of the woman who wiped the face of Christ on his way to Calvary. Little did she know that, just like the Veronica from the Bible, she too would bear the true image of Christ's suffering on her own body. Life in the convent was anything but easy. Veronica devoted herself to prayer and penance, slept little, ate even less, and constantly sought sacrifice as a way to unite herself with Christ. But then something began to happen. She started having visions. She saw Christ carrying the cross, the Virgin Mary speaking words of comfort to her, angels and saints appearing in her cell. But along with these visions came temptations. One night, she was tormented by horrifying voices calling out to her, trying to frighten her. Dark figures appeared in her dreams, attempting to lead her astray. But she resisted, and then the pain began. First, a burning sensation on her forehead, as if an invisible crown were pressing against her skin. Then, a weight on her back, as if she were carrying something unseen. Until one day, as she knelt in prayer, she felt her heart being pierced by an invisible lance. She collapsed. The other sisters found her on the ground, her body cold, yet a strange warmth radiated from her chest. When she awoke, she knew that something had changed forever. From that day forward, Veronica began to experience the wounds of the crucifixion in her own body. Sores would appear and disappear. Blood would seep from her hands and feet without explanation. The nuns in the convent witnessed these phenomena, and little by little the news spread. The church launched an investigation. Doctors were called in and tried to treat her, but the wounds would not heal. The bishop ordered her to undergo rigorous tests to rule out the possibility of fraud. And that's when something even more astonishing happened. The priest, leading the investigation, decided to conduct a silent test. Without saying a word, he commanded in his mind for Veronica's wounds to open and bleed. And that's exactly what happened. It was official. There was no human explanation for what was happening. To this woman, if the life of Saint Veronica Giuliani already seemed mysterious up to this point, what happened after her death was something even the most faithful could never have imagined. But before we get to that moment, we need to go back in time and understand the final years of this saint who lived as if she were reliving the passion of Christ in her own flesh day after day. By then, Veronica Giuliani was the abbess of the Capuchin Poor Clares convent in Città di Castello. She spent her last years enduring suffering that seemed endless. Her mystical experiences not only continued but intensified to a level that even those who believed in her holiness found unsettling. The wounds that had appeared on her hands, feet, and side, resembling those of the crucified Christ, were already a mystery that doctors and theologians could not explain. But the most astonishing phenomenon was what was happening inside her. Veronica began to feel that her very heart was being touched by something divine. At first, it was an intense pain, as if invisible thorns were piercing it. Then came dreams and visions, where she saw her heart being shaped by Christ, marked as if he were carving something into it. And then, one final vision, she saw Jesus holding her heart in his hands. "My daughter," he said, "your heart is no longer yours. It is united with mine, marked by my love." What this truly meant no one knew. Not even Veronica could fully explain it. But she accepted it with humility, as she always had. Yet her suffering only grew. Her body withered, but her spirit remained strong. Even in weakness, she continued to lead the sisters of the convent, teaching them to live a life of prayer and sacrifice. Then, on July 6, 1727, she received communion for the last time, and 3 days later, on July 9th, her time had come. With one final breath, Veronica Giuliani closed her eyes and departed for eternity. But her story was far from over. Her death was not only a profound loss for the sisters in the convent, but also a moment that shook the church. After all, she had already been considered a saint in life, yet no one was prepared for what would happen next. A few months after her passing, the church ordered her body to be exhumed. The goal was to perform a detailed autopsy to better understand the extraordinary phenomena that had occurred during her lifetime. Surgeons, accompanied by ecclesiastical authorities, carefully opened the body of Veronica Giuliani, and that's when they found something that left them speechless. Her heart was unlike that of any ordinary person. It was marked, engraved, as if it had been sculpted by invisible hands. There in the very flesh were sacred symbols, a cross, thorns, mysterious letters, and instruments of Christ's passion. It was as if God himself had left a visible signature on the heart of the saint. The doctors had no explanation. They had never seen anything like it. Some attempted to suggest it could be a natural anomaly, but how could they explain the perfectly formed symbols? How could they dismiss the fact that Veronica had described these markings long before her death? It was a miracle, and more than that, it was undeniable proof that Saint Veronica Giuliani had been chosen to embody in her own body the love and suffering of Christ in a way the world had never seen before. The discovery of Veronica's heart was just the beginning of her legacy as a saint. Soon, pilgrims began visiting her tomb, and reports of miracles attributed to her intercession spread across Italy and beyond. Over time, the Church officially recognized her sainthood. She was beatified in 1804 by Pope Pius VII and later canonized in 1839 by Pope Gregory XVI. Today, her body remains incorrupt, preserved in the convent where she lived, and her heart. It continues to be a mystery, one that defies science and strengthens the faith of thousands who venerate it. But perhaps the greatest legacy of Saint Veronica Giuliani is not in her physical heart, but in the example of her life. She teaches us that true faith requires total surrender, that suffering can be a path to God when embraced with love, that even in the midst of the greatest pain, joy can be found in Christ. And above all, she reminds us that the greatest mysteries of faith do not need to be understood in order to be lived. The life of Saint Veronica Giuliani is filled with fascinating events and extraordinary moments. Here are some remarkable facts that make her story even more compelling. Her spiritual diary, known as Il Tesoro Nascosto, the hidden treasure, contains over 22,000 pages. In it, she meticulously described her mystical experiences, visions, conversations with Christ, and the sufferings she endured. This diary became one of the key sources for studying her holiness. She is one of the few saints in the history of the Catholic Church to have received the visible stigmata of Christ's passion. This means her body bore wounds resembling those of Jesus' crucifixion, including nail marks on her hands and feet, the wound on her side, and even the crown of thorns. During her lifetime, she underwent rigorous investigations by the Church. The local bishop and several priests thoroughly examined her experiences. One of the most astonishing tests was conducted by a Jesuit priest named Giovanni Maria Crivelli, who silently ordered her wounds to open and bleed, and they did in front of witnesses. After her death during the autopsy, her heart was found, engraved with religious symbols, including a cross, thorns, mysterious letters, and the instruments of Christ's passion. This discovery was documented and remains to this day a scientific mystery with no natural explanation. Veronica had a deep devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, often saying that her own heart was united with his. This devotion influenced many others and played a role in the growth of spirituality centered on the love of Christ's heart. Years after her passing, her body was found incorrupt. When exhumed, it showed no normal signs of decomposition, something the Church often sees as a sign of holiness. In 2010, Pope Benedict XVI declared her the patron saint of new communication technologies. At first, this might seem unusual, but it was a tribute to her extraordinary ability to use writing through her diary to share her faith and mystical experiences with the world. Even after her death, many people reported graces and miracles through her intercession. These accounts include unexplained healings, unexpected conversions, and testimonies of spiritual protection. Saint Veronica Giuliani is a unique example of total surrender to God. Her life is proof that when someone completely abandons themselves to divine love, extraordinary things can happen. The story of Saint Veronica Giuliani makes me reflect on something profound. What does it really mean to give our heart to God? We often talk about faith, love for Christ, and trusting in God's will. But when pain and trials come, we hesitate. We long for closeness to God, but without the thorns. We desire grace, but without the cross. Veronica, however, embraced suffering as a path to unite herself with Christ. And that challenges me to ask, to what extent am I willing to accept life's difficulties with that same faith? She didn't just live for God. She literally allowed Him to shape her heart, both physically and spiritually. And when I think about that, I realize how often we want to change the world, but forget that true transformation begins within. Before we seek to change everything around us, we need to let God transform our own hearts. Saint Veronica teaches us that pain can have a purpose. How many times do we run from suffering thinking it's just a punishment or an injustice? But what if instead we saw it as a means of spiritual growth, purification, and love? She saw every trial as an opportunity to draw closer to Christ, and in the end, her heart became a true divine relic. And so I ask myself, if someone were to open my heart today, what would they find inside? Would they see the marks of God's love, signs of a life lived for something greater, or only the scars of fear, worries, and earthly attachments? The life of Saint Veronica Giuliani challenges me to seek a deeper love for Christ, a love that is not just words or fleeting emotions, but one that is engraved on my soul, just as it was on her heart. The message that Saint Veronica Giuliani leaves for humanity is clear and profound. True faith requires total surrender to God, even in the face of pain and trials. She teaches us that suffering, when lived in union with Christ, is not a punishment but a path to purification and sanctification. Her life was a testimony that God speaks to the hearts of those who open themselves to His love, and that every tear, every pain, and every sacrifice can be transformed into an act of divine love. Veronica shows us that the cross is not a burden to be avoided, but a gift that draws us closer to God and molds us into His image. Her heart, physically marked with the signs of Christ's passion, is a powerful symbol that those who live for God bear within them the marks of His love. She invites us to fully trust in divine will and to seek a deeper relationship with Christ, allowing Him to transform our hearts. In a world where so many people run from pain and seek only fleeting pleasures, Saint Veronica Giuliani reminds us that true happiness is found in giving ourselves completely to God's love. Prayer, O Saint Veronica Giuliani, soul ablaze with love for Christ, you who bore the marks of His passion upon your body, teach us to transform our suffering into an offering of love. You who surrendered your heart entirely to God, help us let go of our fears, trust in the divine will, and seek a true and unwavering faith. Intercede for us before the Sacred Heart of Jesus, so that we may live with humility, with courage in the face of trials, and with a sincere desire for holiness. O Saint Veronica, whose life was a reflection of the cross, guide us so that our hearts may be marked not by the pains of the world, but by the infinite love of God. Amen. The story of Saint Veronica Giuliani is a powerful testimony of faith, devotion, and unconditional love for God. Her life was marked by divine mystery, by the pains of the Passion, and by an absolute trust in the Lord's will. Her heart, literally engraved with the signs of the cross, reminds us that God can transform even suffering into a path to holiness. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Journey of the Saints, Sacred Stories, leave a like, and share, so that more people can discover this example of faith. Now here's a question. If God were to mark your heart with a symbol, what would it be? Write it in the comments. Let's talk about it. And don't forget to watch the video above, specially chosen for you. See you next time.